All right, hello everyone. Welcome in. We will continue with part two of going through Gare Bear's interview over here. So let's do it.
And that the patient is in distress. Obviously, the doctor thought she was in distress enough that she ordered an airvac by helicopter from a hospital in Artesia to the hospital in Roswell for full care because they don't render that care apparently in Artesia anymore. So there's a number of ways you could handle that. And if police wanted to get there and go get search warrants, they can try to get search warrants. They can find out a lot of information from the deceased child, DNA, this sort of thing. They can make those comparisons. But as for talking to people about what did this patient say and getting into the privilege, they don't have a right to do that.
Now, I'm going to pause him there, as I always do, because he's right and wrong, right? Like, he's right to the point that no, you shouldn't give out anyone's privileged information and you shouldn't do it easily either. Like, I am on the side of not having the government increasingly take more and more information without anyone questioning it from possible suspects. We should still make it that it's the hardest way possible for them to prove that you are a criminal, right? Because your rights are going to be taken away if they can do that. So I'm on the side of justice needing to be extremely fair for the defendant. But the other side of that is, and in the most layman's way I can put it, is you forfeit certain things simply by being part of society. Now, one of those rights that you forfeit is to having witnesses to possible crime. Now, should it be an end-all be-all privilege for hospital staff that even if a possible crime is committed, that they can't speak at all about it? I really do not think that will be the line that the Supreme Court draws. I really don't think that every single statement Alexee made is covered by privilege. And I don't think that every single statement Alexee made is allowed to be waived for privilege for evidence. Even as much as it's great to have any statements of her saying she wasn't, that she's a virgin, yada, 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 I'm not pregnant coming into the hospital, technically, the virgin statement is the only thing that has any kind of, implications. She could and could remain saying she doesn't know she's pregnant. She genuinely could have been in denial about being pregnant, despite all the videos that we see of her cheerleading and how she looked. Denial is a crazy thing. Not saying that means she didn't know she was pregnant. Denial actually means you did realize at some point, but your brain had to smush it way down in there because you couldn't control or handle the thought of the truth, right? And so denial doesn't mean there's no truth to the matter, that you didn't see the truth. It means you can't handle the truth. And so when it comes to Alexee's statements before going in the bathroom, none of it matters. Everything matters after she comes out of the bathroom, because we don't need to have the statements before then. And I know it's like, we want it all. Well, no, we want it fair too, because we don't want issues for an appeal. But once a possible crime has happened and then she makes weird statements that maybe are taken into consideration by the Supreme Court as something that is in furtherance of a crime, of a possible crime, couldn't those statements be decided on by a jury and not by the judge's evidence, or not? Because it would be evidence for the jury to see. So there's kind of a fine line here that he's having us walk, which is true. But unfortunately for Gary, I feel like he's kind of making it seem like out of nowhere this girl's privacy just got violated and there is no reason for them to be looking over here in her direction, which is just simply not the case. It's just simply not.
Police do investigations. I like to point out, police do investigations all the time when people have lawyers. But that doesn't mean they can violate attorney-client privilege. It's no different here.
So without any of that information, what happens to this case? I mean, we still have, in your view, I mean, obviously you have a client to represent, but we still had a baby, an autopsy was conducted. Your contention is that the drugs given to Alexee, caused the baby's death or contributed to the baby's death. So if we don't have these statements and things of that nature coming into the trial, does the case just go away in your view, or is it resolved by plea? Where do you see this going?
I don't say it resolved by plea, first of all, because I don't think we did anything wrong. My client went to the only place she could get help. She went to the hospital. That's what everybody would think that she should do. And she did everything that the nurses and doctors required her to do.
Okay, so he says two things. She's in a place for help or whatever, and then he says that she was doing everything they asked her to do. Now, in regards to Alexee getting help, every time he brings up Alexee needing help, think about baby Alex needing help, because there was another person who possibly needed help. Number two, when he said she did everything they asked of her, I would beg to differ. I mean, the biggest thing it seemed like she didn't do that they asked was open the door until they got the key. So I just don't understand either of those statements, Mr. Mitchell. If maybe he could explain further, what were all the things that Alexee was doing that they had asked her to do? Because I think the biggest one that matters in this trial is her opening the door any time before them threatening to get the key. That's just my opinion. We can continue.
And everything people were telling her to do. Now, the other matter is that the state's not going to have certain evidence that they can introduce. For example, all the video film and all the stuff that should have been confidential, and all the testing and this sort of thing that should have been confidential. So can they make a case otherwise? I don't think they can, but that doesn't mean they're not going to try.
And of course, he has to say that he doesn't think they can make their case. Let me just try and spitball a few things that would still be in despite the judge's decision. And let's say the Supreme Court goes completely off the wall and also throws every single thing out that has to do with anything medical. We still have any testimony about finding the baby. We still have the autopsy. We still have the pictures of baby Alex. We still have the toxicology report of baby Alex, which shows that phentermine was in the baby system way more than the morphine was, and the phentermine could likely still point to intent, because the phentermine can imply that Alexee knew she was gaining weight, and only maybe someone, possibly just my opinion, with murderous intent for their baby would ignore the fact that they could possibly be pregnant when they still keep gaining weight despite taking this phentermine. So again, we still have layers of evidence, people saying how they found the baby, the pictures of the baby. I won't go through it again for you guys, but there is still evidence. Oh, and to top it all off, we still have the hallway footage. So her running back and forth to the bathroom, the whole reaction, we get to see the baby found. You don't think that will shock the senses of the jury? You don't think it'll shock the jury and make them think that she intended for the baby to die when she walks out and doesn't say anything? I mean, we're just speculating over here. We can't prove nothing. The jury's the one who'll get to decide. But I really don't think there's not any case. And now here is just, I love strategy. Here is my off the wall strategy. I do not care about the statements on body cam that were made once the doctor said we found a dead baby in the trash. I really don't care. Why? Because someone on the jury could be dumb enough to believe, in my opinion, that Alexee was telling the truth. He has a polygraph, which I would guarantee, bet you anything. One of the questions was, did you see the baby alive? She's going to say no, and they're going to say, yep, you passed, and she's going to pass that question, or however that question will be phrased. That essence of question will have been asked on that polygraph, and that is going to be their bread and butter in this case. She didn't know the baby was alive. She did not know he was alive when she put him in the bag. He magically became alive once he was put in the bag, if they feel like they can't disprove the air in the lungs and that he was alive at some point.
They can make a case by saying, listen, we have this child that wasn't born alive. Can they say that the child was born alive? We can have a big argument among experts about that. Was the child in such a state that without immediate medical help, the child wouldn't have survived?
Okay. Here's two things. Number one, his experts are going to battle about that. Well, he's bringing Mr. False out of his chair, Chris Spare, over here, and I do not have any faith, like I've said before, in their expert team, unless he files a new defense witness list before they're going to trial, when he finally has to file his, finalized defense witness list or whatever, unless it includes some actual legitimate hard-hitting witnesses. You can go look at my video about Chris Spare and see why I do not really think he is a great expert to have in this case. He results in a lot of guilty verdicts, okay, with very similar charges to Alexee's child children being hurt and ultimately resulting in death, possibly, right? Allegedly, but not for the people that Chris Sperry has been an expert for, because they're in prison. And so essentially, he's saying his expert's going to fight. Well, I think the autopsy, the evidence is going to stand up. So from there, he says, was the baby in a state that if it needed emergency medical care, would it have survived anyways or not? What kind of statement is that? Just stop and chew on that for a minute. Think about that. So is he just disregarding, like, well, if it was going to die anyways, like, does it matter? She should have just thrown him in the trash, right? Like, so we're going to argue over the baby not being savable. No, there's no hope. No hope. If him having all that phentermine and morphine in his system would have caused a death, then why is Alexee even needing to tell anyone? Why tell anyone? Just throw him in the trash. Very interesting. Very interesting that he says that, because that is just a crazy argument, in my opinion. Like, I don't really think it's going to fly with people to be like, well, if the baby could have died, and if it didn't get help. Now, the other side of that too, why that's a bad argument is what if that makes people think, well, what if the baby could have lived if it got help? And then whose fault would it be that the baby didn't get help, technically? Because due to the pregnancy test being positive, everyone knowing that there was a baby inside Alexee is the only one who knew that the baby was no longer inside of her.
Or could the child have survived? That's another big issue among experts. So we can have those battles. But as for all the things that took place with my client and her comments and her lab tests and the videotape that was made, I mean, I was shocked when I saw that they videotaped people going into the emergency room and people being in the emergency room. I mean, what's going on with that? I mean, there's nothing secret anymore. There's nothing privileged anymore.
Did he say secret or sacred? Secret? That is a weird Freudian slip, in my opinion. If he said secret, and I'm not gonna, stake my bets on that because I couldn't tell exactly. Let's go back.
I mean, there's nothing secret anymore. There's nothing privileged anymore.
I really think he said secret. That's weird. What secret is different than privilege? Like, I mean, I guess maybe it's not like, are they synonyms? I don't know. But secret is just like, what? I bet you, for this defense, I bet you wish everything was secret. Like, I guarantee they wish it was secret, in my opinion. But secret's weird. I'm sorry, that threw me. Okay, let me just, recuperate from that, because it's like, secret is weird. Okay. He's saying that he's like on a board of a hospital, or he's Mr. Hospital Man over here, and he's talking about how, like, this is shocking. Now, other states, like, I've done a lot of research into body cams in hospitals due to this case, which is like I've said, I'm not a big true crime fan. I'm a legal nerd, and this is interesting. Like, it's going to the Supreme Court because of the issues in this case. So, like, anyone here who was like, this is gonna be an interesting legal case, you were right. Like, look at it go. So this is quite interesting. And now states, because pretty much everywhere these days requires police to have body cams on. Now, states have taken into account the fact that police might have to report to a crime that's at a hospital. Okay. They might have to report to a crime that's at a mental institution. Now, one state, I believe Connecticut, decided to write provisions for this into their body cam requirements, right? And so you are allowed to keep your body cam on in a hospital or mental institution. But ultimately, once it's released, it should only have the suspect unblurred. So just because you're in a mental institution or a hospital doesn't preclude you from being the suspect of a crime, according to Connecticut. And, maybe something that the Supreme Court for New Mexico can take into consideration, that other states are making this decision. And something for Gary Mitchell to look at, because, like, hello, you're a defense attorney in a case about body cams in hospitals. And it seems as though most places will allow this. It's just a matter of if a crime was possibly committed or not. There needs to be enough probable cause for a crime. which in your case, I mean, I'm venturing to say there was. So, there are other states who have taken this into account, who have written this out and have, made decisions on this. And maybe the Supreme Court of New Mexico will look into it. Mr. Hospital Man over here should maybe take this into account as well.
Just think about that. If you go see a doctor, should everything that doctor does to you be videotaped?
Now he's really not going to want to live in this America, but there is also talks of doctors wearing body cams. Why? Because there is an extremely high rate of obviously like medical malpractice and those types of civil lawsuits that happen. Those are very lengthy lawsuits, very expensive lawsuits that sometimes are extremely hard to prove the facts on, even though it's a civil case. And so, the evidence isn't held to the same standard, but it still is very hard for people to know exactly what happened. Now, they have started videotaping like aspects of surgeries with those really like tiny cameras that are on the ends of whatever's doing surgery and stuff like that, which helps in some of those cases to see if someone made a negligent move as a doctor, or if something just happened that was something that no one could take into account that would obviously be accounted for by a waiver, right? So there is a thought process that there are people too who willy-nilly sue hospitals, right? Who willy-nilly sue medical things because it gets tied up in litigation, and sometimes they just get paid to go away, whatever, yada, yada, yada. There's lots of reasons for it. Ultimately, that's an issue, and the whole medical malpractice like burden on our justice system is an issue in and of itself, because maybe if some stuff was filmed, a lot of this wouldn't make its way into the courts, and it would not cost a lot of money to go through. It wouldn't take up the time that it would take up, and insurance prices wouldn't go up as a result of all of these lawsuits. So this is something that is talked about like in, legal circles. This is something talked about at bar associations. So this is a thing that could possibly become a thing. It just depends. Like, people are talking about this, the people who study the law. So this is just interesting. Sorry, that doesn't really, it kind of does have to do with the Alexee case because he brought it up in this, but just interesting side legal facts, because again, this is a legal channel. So that is something that is being tossed around and thought about, and, doing thought experiments on how that would pan.
I mean, what kind of craziness is that for anybody? I don't care whether you're a 19-year-old female going into a hospital or whether you're a 74-year-old man going into a hospital. I mean, some of us like to have some privacy in our life. We don't all live in glass houses.
Well, duh, but no one is like just curious about what's going on with your medical issues. No one would have cared what happened to Alexee that night if she had just given birth to a baby and then it was a stillborn and no one would have known. But that's not what happened, allegedly. Allegedly, what the state is accusing Alexee of is what happened. So that is what encroaches on your freedoms. Like, you're not just free to do whatever actions you want. Certain actions are going to invite the police into your life. That's just the way it goes.
How is Alexee right now? We know she was going to college.
We don't care.
So what is she up to? I mean, it's summertime. Classes are probably getting ready to start if they haven't already back there in New Mexico.
Well, she's trying to go to college by taking things, by not being actually physically on campus and doing as much as you can through the internet, this sort of thing. She's trying to do that only because there was such an uproar, a petition that from a large number of people that didn't want her on campus. And so we've tried to avoid that. We tried to keep her away from everybody. She's lived a real a life where she's by herself a lot, or she's with her family a lot, and nowhere else. So she's just trying to wait this out until we have the trial, and at the same time continue with her education as best she can. It's really, it's shocking how vicious people are. I'm just stunned by how, in this type case, how deliberate people have been and how brutal people have been in their comments regarding her and things that went on. And I appreciate the fact that it was a baby. I understand that very, very well. But I also understand that women have miscarriages a lot, That's not an unusual situation.
Okay, so is he gonna go for miscarriage here? He's gonna try and fully fight the autopsy, I guess. He really is. That's crazy.
That children sometimes aren't born alive or children die immediately afterwards. That's just a part of life that we have to go through.
Okay, so then he says that they're not born alive or they die immediately after. But that all three of those things are very different. So he says miscarriage, then he says not born alive or whatever, and then he says whatever. Sorry, but all those are very different. He's gonna have to pick one. If he wavers on that, he there's just no wavering. Like, was the baby born alive or not, bro? And then if you're gonna say the baby was born alive, then we're getting somewhere, because then you're just trying to say that she didn't see that he was live. It's such a higher uphill battle to completely discount the autopsy. There's too many factors. There's just too many factors.
And I understand that, but on the other hand, the reaction of people has been difficult.
The reaction of Alexee was difficult.
For her and for anybody else to understand.
It's kind of concerning that he's saying that she doesn't understand. Like, that to me screams prison, right? Like, oh, so you don't get it still? Okay, that's concerning. I'm going to take note of that. I'm going to take note of that right there. You don't get it? Interesting.
Social media is especially with the internet, social media is a nasty place. And yes, when it comes to a baby, it gets people very, very fired up.
Which is why it is not cool, in my opinion, that they are going to try and politicize this case and make it a women's rights issue to the Supreme Court, it sounds like. Well, that's pretty much all for that interview. Please let me know, do you think that Gary convinced you for trial, that his arguments are going to be solid? Do you think the jury is going to be convinced? How do you feel about the Supreme Court making this decision? Do you think we are going to get any of the evidence back? And do you agree or disagree with me on where the line will be drawn as far as statements made after Alexee goes to the bathroom are going to be considered not privileged, and statements before Alexee goes into the bathroom will be privileged? But as always, thank you so much if you've made it this far in this video. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please leave them down below and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I do genuinely enjoy the conversation. If you're interested in following cases like the Alexee Trevizo case to trial, please subscribe, as I'll be covering it all along the way with a legal focus. It's your Girl Friday. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, bye.